guys, today's video is a quilty video. So this is another hobby that I do enjoy, although I don't get to participate these days as much as I would like, because as a teacher with students who've just returned from a long-term out of school or out of the classroom setting, they're needing a lot more attention than in prior years. So I'm pretty much sticking to smaller projects and trying to find time to do a little bit here and there. And I thought today what I would do is do a little video on my fabric. So let's go ahead and have a look at how I do my fabric. Now, if you're familiar with my channel, you know that I live in a small space, so I have to have certain dedicated areas to supplies. And for my quilting, it's the entire top shelf in my hall closet. And I'm lucky that I have a really tall ceiling kind of space, so I've got a lot of vertical height. I can actually fit on that shelf 14 of these large totes. I know that fabric stashes can be so awesome. I'm really jealous of the people that have like all this room to carry a lot of fabric. I'm not in that situation. So I've really had to work at how I need to make this work for me. So as far as my totes, I basically have about 3 or 4 totes that I devote to just fabric. And that's, you know, loose yardage such as this that I just have in there, maybe yardage that I found and I like and I need for certain purposes or something. And the rest of it has basically projects and pre-cuts and stuff. So I'll go ahead and show you what I have. Now I do keep, somewhat similar to my cross stitching, I have a tote. It looks just like the one I use for cross stitching, and it also has project bags in it. And what I do in this tote, it sits right next to my cross stitching tote, so I love it that it matches. But I keep a bag in the front where I have things I'm using for current projects. They might be flying geese paper or triangles on a roll, or maybe a specialty ruler or something that I'm using for multiple projects. So that's usually in it. And then I have these small tote bags where I have kitted up basically the projects that I'm working on. For example, here's the fabric that I have left for this little table topper that I'm making, and you can see some of my blocks here. It's going to use 3 blocks, and this is a new fabric that has just come out. I was lucky enough to get an early bit of it. This is Fresh Fig Favorites by Fig Tree, and I believe it's just come into stores, but I got some in a scrap bag I received from her a couple of, maybe about a month or so ago, so I was able to utilize this. But it's going to be a beautiful table topper. And here's the leftover fabric that I need for sashing and binding, and the background. So if it's a small enough project, I can just keep them right inside this particular size project bag, and it fits beautifully in my tote. If it is actually a project that I have not started yet, it will also go in here if it's the next project I'm going to be working on, such as the Oh Christmas Tree. I think it's like a wall hanging. Cute little fabric, right? Again, this is another fig tree fabric, fig tree pattern. When you get your pattern, all the requirements are on the back. I actually have this all kitted up with all the fabric that I'm going to need to make this. I'll put it together. I don't usually keep the pattern in here, but since I'm getting ready to start this, I did put the pattern in. And that's because the patterns tend to get wrinkled and whatnot when they're in there. Now, if the block size of the finished pieces will fit in this bag, I'll keep it in here and put it right back in my project bag. But sometimes, like this project that is kitted up in here, these blocks may not fit in this bag. This is a slightly larger bag than you just saw, but this is going to be a twin size quilt. So in this case, I just pretty much have all the fabric that I'm getting ready to use. Had not started this. It's in my project tote, but I do have lots of sizes of those bags. So depending on the size that I'm going to need of the blocks, I can go ahead and keep all the material in one bag. So I'm a big project bag person. Now this is really big, so what I'll do is when I have everything in here, I'll hang this on a pant hanger hanging up in the closet. So it keeps everything sort of nice and tidy. But you can see I've got several different size bags in here. So these are wonderful. So that's pretty much how I keep my project tote bag. So let's get that out of the way. And another way that I keep my projects is to kit them up like this. I don't kit up every single thing I have. Like I said, I do have like think 4 totes of just random like fabric is what I call my fabric stash. Everything else, because of my size constraint issue, I keep kitted. So I don't have lots and lots of just random fabric. I usually have fabric for what I'm going to use. Now this particular kit actually came from a project subscription. This was a fig tree subscription, and I do participate in this. I'm signed up for the year. It comes quarterly, so every 3 months this will come and I get a project in it, which is really kind of nice. So this is the project that came this time, and it is the holly berries. There we go. Here's the pattern. It's going to look like this. It's going to be a wreath, and this will be a table topper, or it will be a wall hanging. And when you get those projects like that, when you get a subscription, is you typically get all the fabric that goes together to make that project top. So this quilt top has everything here. I like that because I don't have to worry about going to the store, trying to find fabric that goes together. I'm actually not really good at that. So even if I had the space, that would be a little bit of a struggle for me. And I know for some people, that's half the fun of kitting up your project. And if you have that talent, I am so enamored and in awe of that. I do not. So if I can get a kit pre-done, that's awesome. I'm really fortunate in that I've made a good comrade in my local quilt shop owner. And oftentimes if I come in like right on first thing in the morning on a weekend when she's not busy and I bring the pattern I want, she will help me to find fabric so that I can kit up what I need. We'll cut what I have to have for fabric requirements, and then she makes sure that I have everything in a nice sort of color palette. So I'm really fortunate. Just remember to be thoughtful of the fact that there are busy hours and less busy hours to go in and ask them to do that for you. And they will often be willing to help you out. And the other way is to maybe buy quilt kits that are pre-assembled for you by the manufacturer or by the shop. Now, this was a Bats and Booze mystery quilt along that was being offered by Fat Quarter Shop, and I was not able to participate at the time they were doing the sew along, but I wasn't really worried about it because I know that I can follow along anytime on YouTube because they keep them there. So the kit comes with everything that you need, and I did buy backing to go with it because 90% of your quilt kits will not come with backing. So this is kind of nice. And these kits store easily since I don't have the space for, you know, lots of reds and greens and just random colors just stored and stored and stored. When I store these already together in the kit ready to go, it saves me that space. So I have that. And they are an investment right up front when you do buy a kit, but if you divide out the money that it would cost for $11 a yard or $7 a yard for plain or whatever you're getting, the kits actually are pretty reasonable. They generally are about what you would expect to pay, and everything comes ready to go. The one nice thing about a kit is a lot of times if you go to a local quilt shop, they have requirements on how small of a piece they'll cut, and sometimes you might only need maybe a 2 or 3 or 4 inch strip of something, but you have to buy 13 inches minimum. So you don't have to worry about that when you have a kit. Everything in there is exactly the size that you need. Here's another version of a quilt kit. Now this is put out by the manufacturer. This is by Riley Blake. This is a table runner kit. It comes in this really cute collectible box, which is really heavy duty, and it has, when I can find the front, there we go, it does have a nice magnetic closure, so you can use it when you're done with the project for your quilting space, and it looks really cute. And usually in that box will be everything you need to do that particular project. So this is spools and bobbins. I actually just received this, and it has the pattern. On the back will be all the fabric requirements, and it will have, again, all the fabric to do the quilt top. So this one takes a charm pack. Charm packs are a 5 by 5 inch set of squares from a designer. This is Lori Holt's Stitch, and it will have generally 42 squares of all the different fabrics from this particular collection. If there's like 42 prints, that's a lot of fabric. But you can get these pre-cuts, which will give you every piece of fabric in that collection at an affordable price. So we have that. And then we also have all the remainder of the fabric to make the quilt top. So I believe this is going to be for the border. This is for the spool tops. This is going to be binding. And this is going to be background. So again, as we mentioned, they often, and most of the time, do not come with backing. So I'll have to purchase backing for that. And I can do that of one of two ways. If I'm really dead set that I want the backing of my quilt or my table runner or whatever to match that fabric collection, I better get online and buy that fabric collection now. They only make one run. It's pretty rare that they'll make a second run. They've done it with Hollow's Eve for Fig Tree. They did it once for one of Cora Yoder's lines. Can't remember what it was. It might have been Springbrook, but I'm not sure. But that's pretty rare. Usually once they make the run, that's it. They're off making another designer's collection and you don't get that. So when that fabric collection is sold out everywhere, it's sold out. So if you're dead set on matching your backing to the quilt top, you're going to have to buy the backing right away. Otherwise, you don't have to. Another option of a quilt kit is another one made by the manufacturer. This is by Moda. And this is going to be for a quilt that will finish at 54 inches by 72 inches. So a pretty large like lap quilt. And these also come with all the fabric and the pattern and everything that you need to make that quilt kit. And if they have discovered an oops in their pattern, they'll often include the little oops correction as well, which is really cool. So you can see all the fabric's there. I don't have to go to the store and try to find it, and this quilt store might have some of this and another quilt store might be out of it and you have to get some of this elsewhere, and you're buying from 2 or 3 different shops, and if you're doing it online you've got to pay 2 or 3 different shippings. For me, this just makes it easy. If you can pull from your fabric stash and you have a good size fabric stash, then that's even easier still. But if you're in a size constraint and you don't have that option, here it is, all ready to go. And this is much easier to store than a tote of all kinds of blues, a different tote of all kinds of reds, a different tote of all kinds of creams, and then they might not even really go together. So you still might end up having to go to the store. Again, not knocking fabric stashes. I am envious of people who have the space. I just don't. So this is just another way to do it if you have a small space and can't do those giant fabric stashes. My fabric stash would be so small I wouldn't really have a good range of different colors. So I would be in the having to go to the store all the time category. Now, does that mean that I never buy fabric for a fabric stash? No, I do. I think I've said I have 4 totes of just loose fabric. I will sometimes buy just little pieces of fabric that I really like. I can add these into a quilt or a block or a small project. I really liked this, don't have a plan for it, but got a ½ yard of that. And if we do smaller projects, then that's fine. Little ½ yards work great. I do keep things like some browns. I also have some random greens, and I have some grays and some blacks. I keep those 4 colors all the time because you can use these if you're doing something where you might need trees, for example, on this quilt that I did. This came out of my fabric stash because I needed some grays for roofs. I had some greens in my fabric stash for trees and some browns that I keep for maybe plant or tree stems or plant stems. So there's a few basic colors that I always keep in there so that I always have a good run. And I got these as well to kind of go into that brown sort of stash. So I do keep several totes of just fabric. And that's the reasons kind of why. And along those lines, I keep this little box here. And what this box is just one of these little boxes you get at like Joann's or Michael's or Hobby Lobby or something like that. And this is basically my solids box. I keep a sample. I like to keep a fat quarter size, a fat quarter being 18 by 24 by 22, because it's a big enough piece of fabric that I can stretch it out and then I can audition my other fabric on it to sort of see what I want to use for a background, how well those fabrics are going to look. So I will open this up, stretch it out, and then I can put my fabric along it. And a fat quarter is a great size to keep as a sample piece. And I keep them all labeled by the name of the color and then the number of it. So I have bunches of them in, oh, I'm out of that one, I lost it. But you'll see I have some grays here. I have some blacks and some charcoals and some shadows. This is thatched. Love thatched. It's one of my favorites. Got some more grays. So they're all in different sort of shades so that I can match to all my projects. And these are basics. And basics meaning that these are colors that are not usually discontinued year by year. These are ones that are always generally kept in stock by the manufacturer. So you can generally get solids all the time. I have some lights here. So that way I can always sort of audition backgrounds or backings. No, backgrounds was right. And that's for quilt tops. So that's kind of a good idea. And that way I don't have to keep all this fabric, you know, yards of this fabric around. I can just sort of pick what I need and then either go to the local quilt shop and buy what I need or order it online by what I need. But I have all the samples here, so I save myself of having to have, you know, several totes just with background. So that helps me to save space. I do also want to talk a little bit about precuts. Precuts are kind of fun. Now what precuts are, just like the chime squares, it's where you get a predetermined cut of every piece of fabric that's in a collection. So this one will have all the different pieces of fabric. It's 42 10 by 10 inch squares. It's often referred to as a layer cake. And it's a good size piece of fabric. Now you wouldn't think 10 by 10 you could do much, but just think about like if you were getting a half square triangle out of that, just how huge that would be. You could cut small squares, you can cut another one into a quarter triangle. I mean, there's so many pieces you can do that with a layer cake, you can make a lot of pretty good size quilts. 2 layer cakes and you could make like a queen size quilt. So I typically find that 1 layer cake works for most of my projects, especially if you're doing like throw blankets and under. So I love a layer cake. This is my favorite pre-cut to keep on hand. They run about $40, so it's within my budget to get one now and again, and I just love them. This is a jelly roll. Now jelly rolls are 2.5 inch strips by width of fabric, and again you're going to get every piece of fabric that's in the collection. Sometimes if there are not 42 fabrics in the collection, you'll get doubles of some of them. But people really love jelly rolls. They're not my #1 favorite, although don't get me wrong, just because it's a 2.5 inch strip does not mean that you can't do a lot of amazing quilts with jelly rolls. I've seen some fantastic jelly roll quilts. And they're really easy to work with. The other type of pre-cut would be a fat quarter bundle. Now fat quarters again are 18 inches by 22 inches. It's a really good sized piece of fabric and you can do a lot with fat quarters. Now bundles are a little bit out of my general budget. Some of these were gifts, they were Christmas gifts, and I also had a good friend, or have a good friend, who had to downsize her quilting. She was generous enough to give me several fat quarter bundles and things like that. So much of what I have was actually gifted by her. So here you see 2 different sizes. It just basically means that the designer of one collection had a lot more fabric designs and pieces of fabric in her collection than did the other one. That also means that the prices are going to change. So this is going to be a lot cheaper than, say, this one. Now, what would be the advantage of that? You could do a whole quilt in this easily, even a little bit of a larger size quilt, like maybe a full quilt or less with something like this. If your blocks took a lot of these fabrics, if your blocks in the pattern you chose doesn't take as much of the designer fabric and the background fabric is a lot more of the quilt, you could do a larger size quilt with a fat quarter. But you can almost always do the majority of your project, and in many cases all your project, with a fat quarter bundle. Now one thing I do love to do is when there is a clearance section at a local quilt shop or even online, I will generally buy enough of that fabric to make the backing of a quilt. And when I do that, I usually try to pick like neutral-ish type stuff, so I know it will go with, you know, whatever I may need. Sometimes I do text. I love text, and text as backing to me is like my favorite. So if I ever find text, I will buy, you know, 4 or 5 yards of that text at whatever the clearance price is. I never buy, or try not to buy anything less than 3 yards, because that will fit a large throw that I would make. If I know I'm going to use that fabric to make a small project like table toppers or things, then, you know, maybe at 1.5 yards to 2 yards is fine. But for the most part, I try to stick with 3 to 5 yards. So it depends on the fabric. And when you can get them on clearance, it really helps to have that background or backing just sort of floating around. I was able to get this, for example, at 50% off. So it was like $6 a yard. So that's the way to do it. Now, how do I keep track of all these quilt kits and things, you might ask? So I have my quilting journal. I generally, on my favorite patterns, try to kit it up. Does that mean I kit up every pattern? Oh, mercy, no. It's generally, I try to keep, you know, a couple of projects ready to go. And this is where this comes in handy. So this is my quilting journal. And again, if you're familiar with my channel, you know I have this exact same book that's called the Cross Stitch Journal. Love it. I usually keep in here all the things that I have kitted up, or patterns that I intend to make over the year. And they're all in here. And if I have them kitted up, I can write all the information about the kit, what fabric I'm using, if I've made any changes, if what the designer is, all that stuff. Pattern designer, fabric collection, the quilt block size, so I know what size each quilt block is, what size the quilt is going to be. It's just a wonderful resource. Also, if I need to put that away for a while and go back to it, I can always pull this out and sort of catch myself up. Or I also will keep this indefinitely. So maybe 5-10 years from now, I'm thinking about a quilt that I made, or somebody's asked me about a quilt that I made, and I'm like, I can't even remember that fabric. I can't remember what I used. I can go right to this, and I can pull it up and go, oh, that's right. This was the Acorn Woods, and I did use Pumpkins and Blossoms by Fig Tree to make that quilt. And then, as you can see, I also have pages that I have not picked the fabric yet, and that's fine. So don't have space for everything I like kitted up either. So that's a great resource that I love to have and I keep around. So the last sort of thing I want to talk about are bundles that are not put out by the manufacturer. I forgot to talk about the fat eighth too. So these are fat eighths. Fat eighths are half the size of a fat quarter, but it also has all of the fabric that is in that particular fabric line, so that you can get a piece of every single one of the designer's designs on that. A fat eighth is 9 by 22, where each of these fat quarters is 18 by 22. But don't discount the fat eighth. You can do so much with a fat eighth. There's tons of fat eighth patterns, and if you think about a 9-inch piece of fabric, you're not always cutting a 9-inch piece that goes in your block. You're usually, you might be cutting, 2.5-inch squares or half square triangles, or maybe the biggest piece in your block is going to be a 7-inch square or 7-inch triangles. So 9-inch triangle or 9-inch by 22-inch fat eighth bundles are excellent to have around too, and they're like much less expensive than the fat quarter bundles, obviously. So you also can get a bundle like this. You can get these off of Etsy. They have a lot of shops there where people put together little bundles of like fabric or fabric that goes together, so that you can just buy it pre-done like that. So for people like me that are fabric color curator challenged, these are awesome. So I love to do these when they're available as well. And as I've said, Etsy, you can go on Etsy and just type up fabric bundles, and you'll see that a lot of people will do this and sell them. So you have that resource as well to be able to get fabric. And all these things fit in those totes, and then those totes stack in my closet. So everything kind of goes in there. Once those totes are full, well, then I have to use it in order to make space for something else, because that's the rule in a small space. So I think I've pretty well covered everything I wanted to say about how I deal with my fabric. Yeah, so if you have any questions or comments or thoughts or some ideas about how I could streamline the system a little bit, please absolutely put it in the comments. And if you're lucky enough to have a really nice fabric stash, I'm jealous. One day maybe, but for now in a small space, I can have enough that I need to be able to quilt and enjoy myself and not be stressed out. And there you go. So we'll see you next time.